Okay. Right, my good point is a really interesting one because it's not actually going to be a giant rant for me. I want to more open the floor and see where you guys go with it. So I have picked for my good point that I think actually within literally the last month, we've managed to completely reshape the conversation around Donk as a player. Because unfortunately, because they hadn't been at all the big events, and obviously they haven't had a massive win recently until this like medium-sized bet Pugnatio. A lot of people, if you notice, especially on like Reddit and Twitter and stuff, were doing that really brain-dead angle of like, right, well, we can kick Donk out of that conversation. It's just Monacy versus Zemu now. Now, look, I understand, guys. I'm painfully aware of what Zemu fans think. I understand that's because Zemu just won a big tournament and was the MVP. So their approach always isn't like, wow, great convo, Monacy fans, let's debate this. It's always like, Zemu's the best. If you can't see that, you're blind. Case closed. And so in doing so, all those people were like agreeing, like, well, we can ignore Donk now, can't we? Whereas two things. One, this is where I actually think figures in the community are really important for stimulating conversation. I have to give props to Vu, who we obviously had on this show, because I think he's the one who framed it the best way. He doesn't just say like, I disagree with Zemu or Monacy for this reason. He actually asked the most genius question that makes you really have to laterally think. Because it stumped me. This is why it's kind of mine Gordian knot I can't solve. Because here's the problem, Maui. I do actually sort of think every time I watch Monacy play and be insane, like, by the way, even in that game he actually had in the playoffs of Cologne where they all shit the bed and he was just hard carrying. Whenever I see him do that, my brain does tell me, oh my God, it actually is like mini simple. This guy has to be the best. But Vu is right. His argument goes like this, Grim. He doesn't say anything about Zemo or Monacy. He just says, like, basically, what is Donk doing wrong? Like, what doesn't make Donk the best player, basically ever, by the way, if you watch him? And I have to say, same concept. Every time I load up a Donk game and I watch it, I'm like, shit, he's got me. Like, look, separately, I can make a great case why Monacy's amazing, but when I watch Donk play, it's actually like, this probably is like the greatest single impact any player's ever had on my screen, maybe ever in Counter-Strike. Like, I can't argue against it. It's actually really, in fact, that's why people have to go to weird external angles, like, is he playing enough lands? How many maps did they, and all the shit like that, because the problem is what it's showing you on your screen. So seriously, the reason why I picked this as my good point is, I do feel like actually plebs were just going to make it like Zemu against Monacy for the rest of the year. But mate, the Donk angle is actually super fascinating, especially when you remember he is a fucking rookie. He is a pure rookie. Even, by the way, people like Simple and Zemu had sort of like a little ramp up time. We just threw this guy straight in the deep end of Katowice onwards. And as a result, it's why actually, a sign that you know people have finally figured out how cracked he is they're already, think about this, when I frame it this way, guys, you'll get it immediately. You know how everyone hates that we're so harsh on Zemu, but it's because the Zemu fans say he is the best player to ever play. So like LeBron James in basketball, you're going to get extra scrutiny because you're not just saying he's really good, you're saying he's the best ever to do it. So at that point, you have to have the craziest standard. Bro, we're already doing that the whole year to Donk every time he has a bad game. And it's year one. See, we said like year 5 or 6 or something, boys. That's when we like crank the scrutiny up. We're doing that to Donk before he's even finished year 1. So I think the convo's in a way healthier place now. I actually do feel like before we were just doing some weird thing of like, well, why didn't Spirit win the event if he's so good, which is the sort of angle I'll always just put out there, by the way. When people say that, you're not actually asking a thought-provoking question. What you're saying is you never looked into it. If you thought you had the answer to that, you wouldn't ask it. You wouldn't go, why isn't he? You'd go, he's not good enough. That's why he doesn't win the event. So I think now the convo's actually gotten interesting. I think you can make all 3 sides again, depending on who wins the event. It's actually the convo. It should be the big marquee matchup that we all want.
Yeah, I think when you look at something like an MVP conversation, you should have to take it like to its extremes to really decide. I think that's also what makes it interesting, right? That rather than looking at it, I suppose, from like a Counter-Strike perspective, it would be like, you know, who's won the most events and who's topped the scoreboard the most, you know, like, or HLTV rating or whatever.
Sure.
Seen as that's probably the platform that we're going to be using. So I think when you're in a world where you can have so many different points to look at and to go through, that obviously means that A, community-wise, punditry-wise, and whatever, it's in a healthy spot, but B, in terms of the competition, it's in a healthy spot, you know, rather than a few years that we might have had where, you know, it was out and out, you couldn't argue it, you know, it's going to be a simple or whatever. There was then Zywoo came in and started to make things a bit interesting, but then it was also less interesting because it was just kind of those two. Maybe
sure.
Nico.
Yeah, that's true.
Like,
you know, no, you're right. The convo at the end of the year was like, is anyone even allowed to be second? Never mind, like number 1. It was just those two. You're right.
Yeah. So I think when we're now in a position that we have 2 AWPers that play very differently, first of all, and then a rifler in the conversation. That's enough to
that's
sort of
dope as well. Yeah,
you know, it's into a new game. It's into the fact that we have a rookie going for it, right? It's just so many different sort of.
That almost even is like the interesting part, actually, Scriv. You're right. It's that it's not even just like Simple and Ziwu were both just primary AWPers that played sort of fairly similar, right? You're right. The other thing that we're doing now is it's like what people should do in the Ballon d'Or, but they never do. Is you have to ask the question: is this just about goal scoring? So should it always be the striker, or can the best midfielder win? Like that's actually an interesting convo. The years you have that, right? And so that's what we're sort of doing with the donk convo. We're asking like, how does he play as opposed to just the stats, right?
Yeah, and it's like you have to also look at it from a perspective of, at least for me, maybe I'm a bit more of a out of the server kind of guy. Like, what have they sort of overcome? Okay. You know, like you say, Donk is a massive rookie, very young, very inexperienced. I would say probably team-wise maybe has a few less resources available, let's say, or like more work to do. Let's put it, you know, more expectations and whatnot. I think maybe Ziwu this year with Vitality has had a few more there.
Oh, for sure.
And then Munacy. Also, I think the team should be able to help him out, but they haven't been as much. You know, Nico's been dropping down. But Donk, definitely on sort of a first glance, and the way that we saw him burst on and everyone sort of up from the tier 2 was like, you know, watch this guy. He's going to be insane. He's been absolutely farming, passes the eye test. And then you sort of looked at the rest of Spirit when he joined in. You're like, can Chopper really lead this guy? You know, are they going to be able to win tournaments, or is it just going to be a case of like good player mid-team kind of thing? So the fact that they've all sort of come together, I think, for him is good, and they've all stepped up. But a lot of that again comes off the back of Donk. But yeah, I think on a more broad conversation, without maybe getting into it as much in terms of we still got, you know, a few months to go here for the rest of the year. I think that the conversation is like in a really, really good spot. It's got a bit more debate, but also it feels like maybe because of Donk, maybe it does come from a place of, you know, supporters and can be a little heated when it comes to like Ziwu fans or whatever. But it is a lot broader. There's a lot more factors to consider here that I think will really sort of answer the question. I think it's also going to be one of those things, right? HLTV Awards at the end of, the start of next year, everyone will have their eyes on and they'll want to know who's getting the MVP, you know, rather than, again, a two-horse race can sometimes be a little bit slow, or we've had a few years where we've just had one player who is out and out the best.
I'm pretty sure haven't they only done the awards like 2 years now? I think they only did it since 2022, didn't they? Isn't that the first time? Right, yeah. As far as I know, because like it was Simple and then Ziwu, I think everyone actually already knew who was going to win that one. If it stays as it is now, genuinely, I don't think anyone actually knows. Like, I'm not sure who even the HLTV bias would be towards it. Maybe Monacy, I'm not sure. Like, because I think he has the most like EVPs or something. But I have to say, if they actually paused it right now, you know, like they did last year, where they keep the top 3 private, I actually think it would be the most hype one ever. Surely no one would know technically.
I mean, one thing that I feel like has helped shift the conversation, there's 2 things. One is I think that Vu made such a strong point. We've kind of taken our spins on the point as to the fact that the role is just so difficult. But I'm going to be completely honest and very cynical about this community, that one of the reasons that Donk was not actually talked about in that conversation between Monacy and Ziwu, and that he's out and that people are actually saying that, is that HLTV users couldn't make the 1 calorie motion of scrolling down on the top players list and adjusting the map minimum to actually show Donk. So they didn't see his name when you click top players immediately. And you had to always change the map minimum because Donk just wouldn't show up, and neither would Shiro. And that's why people would underrate Shiro. They would underrate Donk. And now actually when you click top players just off the rip, it's just going to show Donk's right there because he's played Bet Boom. So I also think that I think also fans have this bad knack of just like, the conversation's over. Okay, we get it. This isn't your job, and you don't want to watch as many games, and you want to be a narrative driver without actually having to put in the hard work of watching these games, which should be entertainment, but it's just that you want to create a whole narrative based off of watching one Vitality game every 2 weeks. And another thing is that I think that when I think about best player, or like even if I wanted to shift it to like an MVP conversation, I do think like there's so many angles that I would still construct as to why Donk is the #1 player, and I'm glad that I think that's kind of become the new common narrative, because Zywoo, Donk, Mondesi, if you strip them away and just put an average player at that position, I actually think that the fall off from G2 would probably be the least. I think Zywoo would actually hurt him leaving Vitality for an average Opper would hurt Vitality kind of a decent amount. But if you just had an average entry fragger instead of Donk, dude, Spirit are bums.
Oh, they'd be like the 12th best team or something, wouldn't they? Yeah,
dude, they're fucking bums.
True, it's true.
Like, you'd have Shiro and 4 bums. Like, I don't even. I know I'm probably downplaying like what Chopper's doing or whatever. It's like, dude, I've seen Spirit be like the 17th best team in the world with a similar core to this before, when they just don't have Donk and they still have a star Opper. They were like that with Dexter. They were like that with Wonderful. They're not actually doing well in tournaments regularly. And I feel like Flom, despite the little bit of pushback he got, like, I think he was on the money. I think that when Donk dies, this team still falls apart. I just looked it up while we were talking there. Is that, like, Donk on round victories has 120 ADR for Spirit at big events with a top 20 filter. Simple in 2021 had 115. Zywoo this year has 110. Mondesi has less than that himself. He has 108. So like Donk is putting in like 20% more damage or 10% more damage than the other best players in the world right now in the round victories. And when he dies,
also, by the way, like, think about this, Maui. Here's the difference as well. That simple number, he wasn't fucking going first on T side. I'll tell you that right now. So that ADR is impossible. Yeah, that's impossible.
Yeah, and Simple's numbers were better in that 2021, but he was saving twice as much. He was saving twice as like Donk is never saving. If Donk sometimes saw someone like on the other side of the map die early on and just decided I'm gonna save and not try to run through a brick wall to get back into the round, his rating would be better. They probably lose more because he does win 1 out of 3 of those, but his numbers would definitely be better. And so that's HLTV rating punishing because his KAST isn't good enough or his DPR isn't high enough or is good
also
enough.
Going to be like, probably going to be the least baity elite player of all time, bro. Like, he just sacrifices his life anytime. Yeah, of course.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's honestly like my premise for a long time has been I rate these kind of fraggers incredibly high. Sure. And it's also why that people know I had like such a thing for Yakindar when he was coming into the scene because he was doing this for VP. But Donk's on a completely another level. He's in a different stratosphere than other entry fraggers right now.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.